Welcome to Hammersmith. My name is Brian Cookson and I spent all my working life in London. But after retiring, I trained as a London Blue Badge guide and was specially drawn to London Thames Riverside. You find so much history and so many architectural gems around here. Now on this tour, we'll explore the beautiful stretch of the north bank of the Thames between Hammersmith and Chiswick. We start here as we look at the iconic Hammersmith Bridge. William Tierney Clark built the first suspension bridge in London here in 1827. He was also responsible for the bridge over the Thames at Marlow and for the famous chain bridge over the Danube in Budapest. But the present impressively decorative bridge was built in 1887 by Sir Joseph Bazalgette, who also built London sewers, and he reused the old piers and abutments from the original bridge. Hammersmith Bridge has had a checkered history. In 1919, Lieutenant Campbell dived into the river off Hammersmith Bridge to save a woman who had tried to commit suicide, but she was actually saved and he then died of an injury. A plaque on the bridge commemorates his bravery. The bridge has suffered from problems of wear and tear, has had to be closed a number of times, but natural deterioration has not been the only danger to which Hammersmith Bridge has been exposed. But the IRA has tried to blow it up for several occasions, but with limited success. There's much to see, so let's get going. So walk to your right along the riverside in the direction away from the bridge. Not everyone has agreed with the aesthetic merits of this bridge. William Morris, who owned a riverside house in Hammersmith we'll visit shortly, called it simply this ugly suspension bridge. However, today it stands as a monument to Victorian engineering and design, beloved by the public and seen by millions as the Oxford and Cambridge boat race crews strain for victory as they pass underneath every year. Unfortunately, as you see, it had to be closed in 2020 after cracks were discovered in the bridge's pedestals. Now, the government and local council both initially refused to pay for repairs. They'd cost well over £100 million. However, it is hoped that sufficient work will be done to allow cyclists and pedestrians to use it later in 2021. We await final agreement on the future of the bridge. Some are even suggesting that a new bridge should be built in its place to honour the Duke of Edinburgh. Now stop here for a moment. The two pubs here have interesting pictures of old Hammersmith and of the Oxford and Cambridge boat race, and that reaches its halfway point at Hammersmith Bridge. The Rutland pub dates from the 19th century and used to have 3 stories but lost the top story after being hit by a bomb in the Second World War. The other pub, the Blue Anchor, dates from 1722. Walk on past the pubs to Lower Mall. Houses here date mainly from the 18th century. This is now a conservation area, so the owners cannot alter them, but it's hard to see they'd want to, as they're so attractive as they are, with their fan lights and balconies overlooking this beautiful stretch of the river. Carry on walking along a Lower Mall, and towards the end of the rows of houses, you'll pass the Furnival Sculling Club before you come to an open grassy area. Carry on walking along the riverside through these attractive gardens. They're named after Dr. Furnival, who founded the Sculling Club we just passed. The club was originally open only to women, which was a groundbreaking venture at the time. It opens its door to men in 1901. Furnival was also one of the founding members and lectured at the London Working Men's College, which is the oldest surviving adult education institute in Europe. The gardens here are sited where Hammersmith started as a small village in medieval times. There used to be a creek here, which was navigable by barges as far as up as King Street to the north of the Great West Road, but today the creek is covered over as an overflow sewer. And beyond this point is the Dove Pier, which was built in 1951 to service boats on their way downriver to Battersea for the Festival of Britain. The pier was originally owned by the proprietor of the Dove Inn, hence its name, but now it's privately owned and has been restored and enlarged for residential moorings. So walk on to the far end of the gardens. Turn right now to walk away from the river. So turn left here into the narrow passageway. Carry on now through the passageway. Stop here to look back at the sign of the Dove Inn. Now, there's been an inn here on this site since the 17th century, but the present building dates from the 18th. Many famous people have enjoyed its hospitality, as can be seen from pictures hanging on the walls inside. During the 19th century, the name was changed to the Doves, but has now reverted to the original Dove. When asked why the plural was used, the landlord explains that after spending an evening drinking here, you're likely to see at least 2 doves when looking at the sign. The beer garden overlooking the river gives splendid views over to Hammersmith Bridge. Now continue walking along the road, which is now called Upper Mall, to Kelmscott House. Stop here a moment to admire this substantial 5-bay, 3-storied house. It was built in 1780. Sir Francis Ronalds lived here when in 1816 he invented the first electric telegraph and sent signals along 8 miles of wires in his garden. Unfortunately, the Admiralty, to whom Ronalds offered the invention, said they could not see any use for it. It was only much later in the century that cables were laid all over the world and the telegraph became the fastest mode of communication at the time. A plaque over the coachhouse door records Ronald's achievement. Carry on walking while I tell you about William Morris, who took over the house and renamed it after his Oxfordshire home, which is also on the Thames. Morris would often row with his friends and family between the 2 houses, but despite his wealthy family background, he became more and more radical in his political outlook. But the basement and the coachhouse are the headquarters of the William Morris Society. Now continue along Upper Mall. You'll have noticed the river walls here have been built to protect the houses from flooding. The Thames is of course tidal up as far as Teddington, and the difference between high and low tide is about 6 metres. There have been several disastrous floods as the water level is rising over the centuries. 1953 saw the biggest disaster when 307 people were killed by a massive tidal surge in the Thames estuary. In London itself, in 1926, the embankment at Chelsea was broken. This caused the death of 7 people. But fortunately, these walls here prevent any such flooding in Hammersmith. Keep on going as you pass by a handsome terrace of Victorian houses. Eric Ravillieu and his wife lived here between 1930 and 1932, and you see a blue plaque on their house at the corner of Upper Mall and Welchie Road. Ravillieu was an English painter, designer, book illustrator and wood engraver. He studied at the Royal College of Arts, where he is much influenced by Paul Nash. Now carry on walking to the end of Upper Mall. Now you're going to pass by a beautiful Georgian building called Linden House, and there's a sign denoting the London Corinthian Sailing Club. The Corinthian Sailing Club was established in 1894 by a group of sailing enthusiasts. They acquired a clubhouse directly on the river near to the Dove and Rutland pubs. The clubhouse was badly bombed in the Second World War and was finally demolished in the early 1960s. So the Corinthians then moved here to Linden House. The club was one of the first London clubs to allow women boat owners and sailors to participate in this hitherto male-only sport. Many famous people have been members, including the athlete Roger Bannister, the naturalist Sir Peter Scott, and the reformist MP and author of the popular novel The Water Gypsies, A.P. Herbert, who we'll meet later on. Now walk on to the open area ahead. Carry on walking by the river through the landscaped area here, which is known as Upper Mall Open Space. Now you will shortly come to a viewing platform overlooking the river. And you might like to stop here to look at the attractive information board. This shows a map of the area and covers many of the locations on our walk. Towards the end of this open area, you'll see some arched brick walls in front of the Black Lion pub. This is all that remains from the Middlesex Water Company, which used to supply water from here until 1852. Then it became illegal to supply water from the tidal reaches of the Thames due to pollution. The complex was designed by William Tenney Clark, who was a chief engineer, and he also designed the first Hammersmith Bridge, as we already saw. The church you see just behind the gardens is St. Peter's. It was built in 1832 in the Grecian style. Now walk on to the end, where you'll see some steps which lead down to the river. Stop here at the top of the steps. They're called Bell Steps after Frederick Bell, who ran a ferry from here until Hammersmith Bridge was built, and that made the ferry redundant. They're also called Black Lion Steps, as the Black Lion pub is just up the path. This historic pub was built in the early 19th century. It's associated with the tragic story of a ghost. But we will avoid the temptation of enjoying one of the local beers there, so with your back to the river, walk as far as the left turn into Hammersmith Terrace. Now turn left here into Hammersmith Terrace. The 17 substantial houses here were built in the 1750s. They all have gardens on the other side, facing the river. They're not as symmetrical as typical Georgian houses, and some of the Doric stucco porches painted black. Now walk on and look out for plaques on some of the houses. The plaque on number 3 is to Edward Johnston. He was a calligrapher and the teacher of the sculptor Eric Gill. He's most famous for designing the sans serif Johnston typeface that was used throughout the London Underground system until it was redesigned in the 1980s. He also redesigned the famous roundel system used throughout the system. Walking a little further on, you'll pass the Emery Walker Trust, and that's housed in number 7. As you already heard, Emery Walker was a friend of William Morris. The arts and crafts interior of the building survives, and it is possible to book a tour of the house. Carry on walking. A.P. Herbert lived here in number 12, and he lived here for 50 years. He was a Member of Parliament for Oxford University until the seat was abolished in 1950. He is best known for his novel The Water Gypsies, which is set on the Thames, and also for his humorous misleading cases in the common law. And in one case involved an angry customer who presented his bank cheque written on a cow. Now go on to the end of the terrace and on into Chiswick Mell. Now keep to the right of the road and carry on walking for a few minutes. On your left, as you leave Hammersmith Terrace, are some modern houses, and this is an artist colony. As it happens, my brother married the daughter of an artist who owned one of these houses, and I once enjoyed watching the boat race from the terrace overlooking the river. Now continue walking. You'll pass by some fine houses on your way. I should warn you that occasionally when there's a high tide, this road gets flooded. You'll notice some houses have barriers to keep out the water when this happens. Now keep on going. On your right, you'll see Miller's Court, and this development was built by Trafalgar House in 1970. It's in the modern neo-Georgian style, which fits in quite well, I think, with the many older properties in the Mall. It replaced a 19th century bakery owned by the Miller family, which closed in 1966. Across the other side of the road is landscape communal riverside garden. Gardening seems to be a popular occupation of people living here, and no less than 8 houses open their gardens for the National Open Gardening Scheme. Now carry on walking. Stop here a moment to see the small stone boundary marker is just on the pavement in front of Cedar House. A little bit small, so to see if you can find it. And this indicates that you're moving from Hammersmith to Chiswick. Now carry on walking along the road past Cedar House. On the right side of the road, the most highly valued home in the road. Stop here for a moment in front of this imposing red bricked house. It's called Walpole House, built in the early 1700s. It's named after the Walpole family who owned it. Sir Robert Walpole was Britain's first Prime Minister. It was Thomas's nephew who lived here and is buried in St Nicholas Church, which we'll see later. William Thackeray attended a school here in 1817 and is thought to have used it as a model for Miss Pinkerton's Academy in his famous novel Vanity Fair. And next door you'll see Strawberry House, built at the same time with an attractive iron porch added in the 1790s. You will shortly pass by a white-coloured house. It's called Greenash, and this was the home of the shipbuilder John Thornycroft and his father, the famous sculptor Hammersmith Thornycroft. We'll meet them both again later. The island in the river nearby is called Chiswick 8. Although it's spelled E-Y-O-T, it's pronounced 8. It's an old Saxon word for island. It's commonly used for the islands on the Thames. Osiers grow on it and used to be cut for baskets for fishing in former times. Unfortunately, the island is being washed away. It's shrunk from 1,200 metres in 1900 to 300 metres today. At low tide, it's possible to walk right across to it, but at high tide, the water can come right up onto the road, so it becomes impassable. So walk along until you come to Chiswick Lane on the right. There was an old draw dock here, where boats could be moored and dragged up the slope onto dry land. If the tide is out here, you can sometimes walk across to Chiswick 8. But if there's a very high tide, the road gets flooded. Now, if you make a detour up Chiswick Lane, you'll actually see the entrance to Fuller, Smith and Turner's brewery. Just beyond that is the Mawson's Arms pub. Thomas Mawson founded the brewery in 1701. It was taken over by Fuller, Smith and Turner in the 19th century. Today, their most famous ale is, of course, London Pride. It is possible to take a tour of the brewery and watch how they make it, and also you get a drink. Now continue along Chiswick Mall to Bedford House. A little further on past Chiswick Lane, you'll see Bellevue Cottage. This is the traditional home of the chief brewer of Fuller, Smith and Turner's brewery. It originally belonged to Edward Russell, the younger son of Earl Russell, whom you will meet shortly as the builder of a wall by St Nicholas Church. And this house was rebuilt in the 18th century to be split into two, now called Bedford and Aynham. And the actor Michael Redgrave lived here from 1945 to 1954. Now carry on walking to the end of the road and then cross over to the stone causeway that slopes down to the river. On the way, you're going to pass the present vicarage, and after that the old vicarage built in 1658, but refronted in the 18th century with a fine bow window. And that is the last house on Chiswick Mall. Stop a moment here to look at the former slipway from which a ferry operated from 1659 until the 1930s. It's still used as a dock, unloading timber and hops for the brewery. Now walk to your right up Church Street and go on for about 50 metres past the churchyard gate until you reach a stone plaque in the wall. Just beyond the gate, you'll see a stone tablet on the churchyard wall facing the road. You can with some difficulty read the singular inscription by the Earl of Bedford, who built the wall to protect the bodies in the churchyard from violation of swine and other profanation. This was the same Earl who, with the architect Inigo Jones, developed Covent Garden in the new Palladian style in the 17th century. Our walk ends here. You could now walk up Church Street and cross the Hogarth roundabout to visit Hogarth House. This has a complete set of his engravings on show. Thank you for joining me on this walk along one of the most beautiful stretches of the Thames. We've seen some magnificent sights, including the iconic Hammersmith Bridge, several historic pubs and imposing houses often connected with famous people. But anyway, I'll say goodbye and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.